watched Lewis from the pit lane start to 7th. Did you enjoy that a good bit better today?
Yeah, I mean, I always love races like that where you're challenged and having to make your way through the field. That's really kind of like how my life started in racing at Wright House, as we had not such a great go-kart and we'd always start at the back. So very reminiscent of that sort of thing, and great work by the team. Ultimately, disappointed to have had not such a great weekend. Definitely want to forget, but at least I've still got some points, and we outscored Mercedes collectively. And but yeah, I got to go back, and can't always get it right. And there are lots of factors that contributed to Friday. Saturday was again some factors, but ultimately me, and then obviously recovered a little bit today. But big thanks to the team. I'll try and come stronger next week. I think I know the car a lot better now with the changes that we've made, so I've got a lot more confidence.
What if I told you that Lewis Hamilton is no longer saved and has said aloud what many feared about Ferrari? Spa-Francorchamps was much more than a complicated race for Lewis Hamilton. It was an radiography of the abyss between the expectation and the reality that the 7-time world champion lives since his arrival in Ferrari. What seemed to be a romantic turn in his career, the union between the most laureate pilot in modern history and the most emblematic team of motor racing, is becoming a more complex journey than expected. After the Grand Prix, Hamilton was honest and self-critical. He expected, in his own words, cut the learning process, thanks to his vast experience, his career intelligence, and his ability to adapt for years in the elite. But it was not so. The SF25 has been shown as a demanding car, which punishes each minimal disconnection between the pilot and the machine. Unlike his last seasons in Mercedes, where every millimeter of the car seemed to anticipate his intention, in Ferrari each curve is a conversation not yet fluid, a language that Hamilton is still learning to speak. The Spa circuit accentuated this disconnection. It is a technical, fast route, with elevation changes in areas where full confidence in the car is essential. And that was precisely the problem. Trust was not there. Hamilton revealed that during the weekend he was just beginning to understand the changes that could be made in the car within the small margin that allows current regulations, and that he had not yet achieved a setup base that gave him comfort, much less advantage. That discomfort was reflected not only in its rhythm, but also in its way of driving. The British acknowledged that he has had to modify his pilot style, abandoning some of the techniques that made him successful with Mercedes. He is trying to adopt the most aggressive and fluid approach of Charles Leclerc, which bases his speed on maintaining a high curve speed without resorting to the brake. Hamilton began to release the accelerator before, to load the brake pedal progressively and trust more on the front train of the SF25, even when he did not feel completely sure of his response. The key is what he did not say, but it was suggested. This car is not designed around him. The SF25 is, in many ways, an evolution of Ferrari's philosophy built around Leclerc, and although both pilots share information and collaborate closely, there is a natural barrier between a pilot that has been adapted to a specific philosophy for years and another that arrives with acquired habits and different expectations. Not because of the points he added or stopped adding, but because, for the first time he signed with Ferrari, he publicly admitted that this journey is not just about competing. It is about rebuilding. Hamilton's words after the race in Spa were not a simple catharsis, but the prelude to something more important, a mentality adjustment. Instead of frustrating or looking for excuses, the British transformed disappointment into information. Spa served as an emotional and technical laboratory, where it was evident that the reflexes acquired in more than a decade with Mercedes were not enough to tame SF25. But far from resigning, Hamilton decided to dismantle his old customs and rebuild himself as a pilot from a new base. In that process, the first step was technical. On the track, Hamilton began to alter its mode of reading the curves, to experiment with new trajectories, to feel the front train of the car without relying so much on the aerodynamic load it used. At the braking level, its transition from the accelerator to the brake went from being aggressive to more dosed, seeking to approach the style of Leclerc, which maximizes mechanical grip instead of forcing the car with violent inputs. And although the result in Belgium was not yet brilliant, it was revealing. At times he managed to match the rhythm of his partner, and in specific batches he even beat it. Beyond the technical analysis, the real change was gestated in the invisible: acceptance. Hamilton confessed that he underestimated the process. He thought that his experience would make him immune to the learning curve, which he could perform at the maximum with only some adaptation careers. But Spa taught him that it is not enough with talent. You have to be a student again, listen more to talk, and accept that Ferrari has its own rhythm of functioning, its own way of understanding F1, its own language. At the strategic level, it has also begun to have a more proactive role within the team. After the race, it was learned that Hamilton participated directly in data analysis meetings, not only to understand the car, but to understand how Ferrari makes decisions during a weekend of Grand Prix. From motor maps to tire wear simulations, the British wants to dominate every aspect that can influence its performance. He no longer expects the car to adapt to him. He is now determined to integrate completely into Maranello's architecture. That approach has begun to have an impact. In the next race, in mixed conditions, Hamilton managed to establish himself better. His car management was more fluid, his most consistent times, and although the result was not spectacular in terms of points, it was in terms of sensations. He himself described him as, "The first time I felt that the car answered me without having to think about every movement." It was, in essence, the first moment he felt again a pilot and not simply passenger of an unpredictable car. Hamilton's awakening has nothing to do with a pole position or with a victory yet, but with that intimate and silent moment in which the pilot recovers control. It is not the return of the champion that raises the trophy, but of the one that recovers the internal conviction that he can win it. And in Formula One, that conviction is as powerful as a 10th by return. The Belgium Grand Prix marked a dividing line in Hamilton's narrative with Ferrari. Until that time, the story was written with nostalgia ink and romanticism. But now, that ink has changed for a more raw, more realistic, and much more revealing stroke. Because what Hamilton lived in Spa was not just a bad weekend, it was an epiphany. And that epiphany already begins to shape the immediate future. The key is what Ferrari has learned too. Maranello's team understands that it can no longer function as an entity divided between Leclerc and Hamilton. The era of strategic coexistence without integration has been left behind. SPA data confirmed that both pilots are driving practically two different philosophies within the same car, which greatly limits the efficiency of technical development. If one goes in one direction and another in another, the data becomes contradictory. But after Spa, the team has decided to unify criteria, work on a common setup platform that allows cross-feedback between both pilots. That is only possible because Hamilton has begun to approach Leclerc's style, and that opens new doors. On a technical level, the SF25 remains a car with a narrow work range. Do not forgive piloting or configuration errors. Its greatest virtue is in the average curves, but loses traction in slow exits and is unstable in prolonged braking. Hamilton is beginning to understand these nuances, and that is why he has requested very specific changes for the next calendar quotes. Mass redistribution to improve the braking weight transition, adjustments in the rear suspension preload to stabilize traction, and new motor maps to better manage the wet power delivery, an obvious weakness of Ferrari from Australia. But beyond technical data, what changes the most is internal discourse. Hamilton, who arrived as a legend, now acts as one more engineer. Participate in simulation sessions, asks mechanics about correlations between wind and track tunnel, and has even begun to influence career strategy decisions. In Belgium, although it did not translate into immediate results, an improvement in radio communication was noticed. The instructions were clearer, the most reactive decisions, and the much more constructive post-carrier feedback. This new role of Hamilton as an integrative figure within Ferrari could be the most transcendental change since its arrival. It is no longer a media signing or an emblem of the past. It is a transition leader. And that leadership, when it strengthens, can become the catalyst that Ferrari needs to make the next competitive jump. The case of Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari is not just a story about cars, points, or podiums. It is a deeply human narrative about adapting to change, recognizing one's limitations, and rediscovering the passion to compete in the middle of the technical and emotional chaos that implies a new beginning. What he said after the Belgium Grand Prix was not a complaint, nor an excuse. It was a confession from the trench. A brave recognition that, even being one of the best pilots of all time, getting to Ferrari means starting from scratch. Understand the car, understand the team, and above all, understand yourself in a new stage of your sports life. And that's why the question now is not whether Hamilton will win a race this season. The real question is whether Ferrari will be able to become the environment that allows this process of personal and technical transformation to translate into victories. Because Lewis's talent is not in doubt. What is at stake is whether the structure, philosophy, and culture of the Maranello team will live up to that talent in the key moments of the season. Now it's your turn. Do you think Hamilton will dominate the SF25 before the summer stop? Or are we witnessing a more symbolic stage than competitive in your career? Is Ferrari the right place to close its story in Formula One? I want to read you in the comments.